Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. Tonight's guest is Paul DeRienzo. Paul is in New York City, a longtime activist and broadcaster on cable television there in New York and on WBAI, the Pacific flagship station there. So we'll be talking to him about marijuana legalization. We have a couple of clips that he recorded at the New York City Cannabis Parade back on May 1st with New York's Attorney General Leticia James and the United States Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who spoke at the New York City Cannabis Parade. So we have their speeches will be running here tonight, along with our interview with Paul DeRienzo. So stay tuned for that. We have a great hemp news segment, but first, as always, we'll start with our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
So our first story tonight is from right here in Oregon. Oregon's Governor Kate Brown signed 2 bills into law to regulate marijuana delivery services in the state and make changes to Oregon's medical marijuana program. HB 3369 will allow naturopathic physicians, physician's assistants, certified registered nurses, nurse practitioners, and anesthetists to join MDs, or medical doctors, and DOs, or doctors of osteopathy, who have long been able to sign medical marijuana recommendations. Another bill eliminates state fees for service-connected disabled veterans with a disability rating of 50% or more. Both bills go into effect in the fall. This week, Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak signed legislation into law easing medical marijuana possession penalties for minors and amending the state's per se driving limits for THC. Nevada's Assembly Bill 158 revises first-time penalties for minors who possess personal use quantities of cannabis up to 1 ounce to community service. It also requires courts to automatically seal records for offenders once they've completed the terms of their sentence. This law takes effect on October 1st. Nevada's Assembly Bill 400 amends the state's traffic safety statute so that the operation of a motor vehicle with trace amounts of either THC or its metabolite is no longer a per se violation of the law in certain circumstances. I've consistently opposed the imposition of THC per se limits, opining that such thresholds are not evidence-based and that they may lead to the criminal prosecution of people who consumed cannabis several days previously but are no longer under its influence. This law takes effect on July 1st. Nevada's Governor Steve Sisolak signed these into law, and it will allow adults to purchase and consume cannabis products on site at any licensed cannabis consumption lounge. The measure establishes regulations for 2 distinct types of cannabis consumption lounges. One group would be reserved for existing marijuana dispensary license holders who can then apply to operate an on-site cannabis consumption lounge. The other designation would be for new independent businesses to apply for a license to operate independent cannabis consumption lounges, which is not attached to or adjacent to an existing retailer. The bill also provides for reduced license application fees for qualifying social equity applicants. Local governments can enact policies restricting access to cannabis consumption lounges under this bill. This law takes effect on October 1st. Alaska and Colorado previously enacted legislation explicitly permitting social consumption sites for cannabis, and New York's nascent adult use law also regulates on-site facilities. On a national basis, a commission formed between the National Football League and the league's players' union plan to award up to $1 million in grants for researchers to investigate the therapeutic potential of marijuana, CBD, and other alternatives to opioids for treating pain. At a press conference on Tuesday, a representative from the NFL NFL Players Association's Joint Pain Management Committee said, quote, clearly there are a lot of great ideas in this space and there's lots of important research that needs to be funded, end quote. Asked if the ongoing prohibition of cannabis as a Schedule I drug is to blame for the relative lack of definitive science on cannabis's effect, PMC co-chair Dr. Calvin Hill said the federal policy, quote, definitely adversely affects the level of research that's allowed, end quote. That said, Hill also pointed to a lack of funding in this area of research and said, quote, it affects it more adversely, end quote. Meanwhile, the NFL's drug testing policy changed demonstrably last year as part of a collective bargaining agreement. Under the new policy, NFL players will not face the possibility of being suspended from games over positive tests for any drug, not just marijuana. The decision reflects a significant shift in the league's approach to drug use by players, with the agreement emphasizing the need to focus on, quote, ensuring evaluation and treatment, end quote, rather than punishment. Meanwhile, a temporary NBA policy not to randomly drug test players for marijuana amid the coronavirus pandemic may soon become permanent, the league's top officials said in December. Rather than mandate blanket tests, National Basketball League's Commissioner Adam Silver said the league would be reaching out to players who show signs of problematic dependency, not those who are, quote, using marijuana casually, end quote. Well, thank goodness for that. Washington State University Center for Cannabis Policy Research and Outreach, or the CCPRO, was officially approved by the university's Faculty Senate and Board of Regents last month, formalizing its designation as a cannabis research center. Michael McConnell, CCPRO's director and professor at the Elson Floyd College of Medicine, said, quote, the center's status recognizes Washington State University's researchers' outstanding multidisciplinary scholarship on cannabis. It also brings together under one center work on everything from research focused on the impact of cannabis on development to scholarship on cannabis and public safety, as well as our growing hemp research. We're seeing some of these barriers to research being lifted in a stepwise way. It'll help us to keep up with the cannabis industry to provide the citizens of Washington with the information they need to make informed decisions about their health and cannabis, end quote. Washington State University said that over the last 6 years, its researchers have engaged in 50 projects with nearly $10 million in funding from marijuana taxes. The university said there are nearly 100 scientists working on cannabis-related projects. Recent projects, WSU said, include behavioral and biological predictor study of problematic cannabis use, which was awarded a $400,000 National Institute on Drug Abuse grant. Washington State University researchers also are conducting a hemp seed trial near WSU Prosser's Irrigated Agricultural Research and Extension Center facility. The center has also partnered with Oregon State University and California Davis on hemp germplasm studies and the Puyallup tribe on a study to use of cannabis for pain management. The Washington Liquor and Cannabis Board, or LCB, on Monday approved a, quote, Joints for Jabs, end quote, program that will allow adult-use cannabis retailers to give away a single pre-rolled cannabis cigarette to anyone 21 and older who gets a coronavirus vaccine at clinics held at cannabis retailers this week. The agency indicated that, quote, no other product may be provided as part of the program, end quote, which applies to individuals that are receiving either their first or second dose of the vaccine. In a press release announcing the approval, the Liquor and Cannabis Board said it would allow retailers in Washington to advertise the Joints for Jabs program, quote, so long as the licensees maintain compliance with all other advertising regulations, end quote. It noted that regulators have already, quote, provided dozens of allowances for alcohol and cannabis licenses through the COVID pandemic in an effort to support businesses during the restriction period and to support the vaccine effort, end quote. Most recently, the Washington Liquor and Cannabis Board said it provided an allowance for a free beer, wine, or cocktail to be given to those vaccinated by June 30th. While the free products will not be subject to state and local taxes, retailers are required to maintain all records associated with the giveaway, including seed-to-sale tracking requirements. Throughout the United States, cannabis activists and retailers have offered promotions to individuals who received the coronavirus vaccine. In January, Michigan's Greenhouse of Walled Lake Dispensary announced a Pot for Shots campaign, which offered a free pre-rolled cannabis cigarette through February to anyone who provided proof they'd received a vaccine. Activists in the District of Columbia Marijuana Justice Committee, DCMJ, in January announced their own plan to give away cannabis and seeds at vaccination centers throughout Washington, D.C. New York City activist Dana Beal and the Cannabis and Ibogaine Alliance have also been giving away free joints for jabs in public parks in New York City. Our last story tonight is from the American South. Mississippi voters support legalizing marijuana for both medical and recreational use, according to a new poll. In fact, that support is so strong that 20% of voters that say medical cannabis is the single most important issue that they will determine how they'll vote in upcoming elections, outranking all other issues, including job creation, infrastructure, public safety, and education. Mississippians are fired up over the medical marijuana after the state Supreme Court invalidated a reform measure that overwhelmingly passed at the ballot last November. The ruling was related to a procedural flaw, according to the court, in a citizens' initiative process, not in anything that the organizers of the petition did. Now, 63% of voters say they want the legislature to pass a bill that mirrors the ballot measure, according to the new survey from Millsaps College and Chisholm Strategies. What's more, 52% of respondents say they back ending prohibition altogether and legalizing cannabis for adult use in the state of Mississippi. Nathan Strader of Millsaps College said in a press release, quote, "If you look closely at what the voters are expressing in terms of their policy preferences, you will see they do not appear to be anywhere near the same ideological positions as the majority of the state's elected officials. The upcoming months, including the 2022 legislative session, will be a test of how long the state's elected leaders can hold positions that are greatly at odds with the majority of Mississippi's voters," end quote. A separate poll released last month found that 61% of voters in Mississippi oppose the Mississippi Supreme Court's ruling on Initiative 65. A plurality want the justices who voted to overturn the measure impeached, and 70% want the legislature to pass a bill that's identical to the ballot proposal that the Supreme Court struck down. A majority, 60%, also favor having the governor call a special session to tackle the issue. This latest survey involved interviewing 659 Mississippians from May 26th to the 28th. Mississippi's Governor Tate Reeves, a Republican, said over the weekend that, quote, "I support the will of the voters and I think we'll have a medical marijuana program in Mississippi," end quote. While he's yet to say whether he'll convene lawmakers for a special session, he said it's, quote, "imperative that we get it done and get it done quickly," end quote. Yes, Governor, it is. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. If you are a loved one or looking for a doctor to help you obtain a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States, including the American South or here in the Northwest, give us a call. We have a physician referral service. You can call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. So our guest tonight is Paul DeRienzo, and he has recorded the United States Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's speech at the May 1st New York City Cannabis Parade, along with recording the State Attorney General, Leticia James. And so stay tuned for the interview with Paul DeRienzo and help us restore hemp. Good night. Well, welcome. We have a great guest on our show tonight. It's Paul DeRienzo from New York City, the news director of WBAI, the Pacifica station in New York, one of the initial Pacifica radio stations. I know here in Portland we have an affiliate, KBOO. And so, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate being on your show. It's really exciting.
It's good
always
to
like
have
to
you.
be, yeah.
I know you've been working at Cannabis Reform at least since you were the editor at High Times back in 1998, right?
Oh, before that, since the first time I smoked a joint when I was 14 years old in the woods behind the house where I grew up in Yonkers, New York.
Yeah, we were all it's a calling, so to speak.
It was. I immediately changed my life that first time I smoked a joint.
So how did you become an activist after first smoking a joint when you were 14? I know.
Well, I'm old enough to have been around during the Vietnam War period, and my friends and I were all opposed to the Vietnam War, even though we were just in high school. But it kept going on for so long, we were afraid that we might get drafted eventually. We might get actually old enough to get drafted. It kept going on and on and on. But beyond that, I think, and so we were, then I met some Vietnam veterans against the war people. and I worked with the McGovern campaign, and I fell in with all these really cool New York radical types, and it was a rebellious time in general. I went to high school, Catholic high school at Fordham Prep, which is part of Fordham University, and while today it's sort of a sleepy Bronx college, for commuter college, back in those days, it was like no different than Berkeley or Columbia or anything. And it was funny that my parents were sending me to what they thought was a nice little Catholic school where I would get a proper education, and I was surrounded by like the Panthers and the Yippies. And we had the music room, and people were, doing acid and organic mescaline, and marijuana was everywhere. And, all my friends were, I had all these African-American friends, and I grew up in a neighborhood where no African-American people ever lived there, or I never got close to an African-American person. All of a sudden I'm hanging around in African-American circles and hanging around in Latino circles, and everybody's like passing me joints and drinking tequila. And then my friends, we really got into the Firesign Theater and Cheech and Chong and listening to the Dead and the Airplane. And we would go up to the Capitol Theater in Portchester where all the bands played. And it changed my life. And it socially changed my life. And then the Vietnam War activism, we were working for the McGovern campaign and all those kind of things. I think we were all traumatized. Yeah, we were traumatized by, yesterday was the anniversary of our RFK assassination. And, that year, even though I was only 12, it was traumatizing, Kennedy, Martin Luther King, all the stuff that was happening that year. It was just 12 years old, but it had a big effect on me. And then I decided through one of my compatriots through this world, an older woman who sort of took me in hand and wanted to talk to me, said, Paul, you should go to the University of Wisconsin. You would fit right in there. And so I did. And my parents thought, at least he's not going to Berkeley. They didn't know. I swear to God, they had no idea. It was even worse. And
you met Ben Mazel.
Right. I met Ben Mazel like the first week I was there. And through Ben, I met Dana. In 1974 and 1975, and I met Dana later, like the mid 70s, later 70s, and we had he had the 80s conference, so we had this big event where all like Abby was still on the ground, and his wife came, and Aaron Kay he was a young, like a biker. Aaron Kay, hard to believe, he's such a roly-poly nice guy, but he was like a biker a biker radical in those days, and yeah,
that's the way he was as well. I think I met him in March of 1980 in Chicago.
Yeah. I met him like the year before in Madison, and then I came back to New York. I mean, everybody kept saying it. I was thinking of moving to California because I had spent some time in Santa Cruz, and I love the Bay Area, and that was my plan. But all my friends kept saying, Paul, you got to go back to New York because, you have a knack for this political stuff, and that's where you can have the most impact. A lot of my friends who were from Wisconsin and Chicago and places like that, they said many people want to go to New York and few could pull it off, and you could actually pull it off. And so I came to New York, and of course, the only way even then I could live in New York was move to the poorest neighborhood, what was then the poorest neighborhood in New York, the East Village, and which is a few blocks away from Dana's pad over on Bleecker Street, and the rest is history. I worked, various jobs. I mostly worked. I worked for the city for a while as I was into urban planning, and I worked for a city development company that tried to build I was building like a little, trying to save the last shreds of industrial jobs in New York. We didn't do a very good job of it. And then I became a teacher after that. And educating people was my thing, and I think one of the main things I wanted to educate people about was that not only was marijuana good, the war on drugs and the war on marijuana was making a lot of my students into criminals, and they shouldn't have been criminals. And so it merged my general like anti-war civil rights feeling merged with my marijuana cultural radical feeling into and I love the Yippies to me because I had been in other groups. I mean, when I was a kid and more like a warrior type, I had gone down to Mississippi to fight the Klan, and I had dreams of the revolution. But when I realized that you have to be prepared for the long haul. This isn't going to happen tonight or overnight. I turned more to the yippie way of doing things, which was to have more of a sense of humor. And I love Dana's soft strategy idea. And I was sort of a follower of Guru Dana and his soft strategy, which was back in those days, instead of taking on the government full frontal and getting like bashed down, and we decided to use a sense of humor. Like, for example, recently, joints for jabs, right?
Yeah.
Right, giving out joints free. Now that it's legal in pot, we actually legally could give away a joint for people who showed us their ID that they had gotten a jab. And of course, up until recently, you had to be over 21 to get a jab. So you were over 21, we could give you a joint, right? You got jabbed, so you must be over. The government had approved you as being over 21 to give you the jab. So then when you could come and show us your card, it also proved your age. You're over 21, and you could get a free.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it, I think, on MSNBC, and it was in the New York Times, I think, as well.
Yes, absolutely. It was. I have to give Dana credit. Dana is a difficult dude sometimes, but I can say this as a theoretician.
Acolytes as well. I first met him at the same time I met Aaron there in Chicago. But, it was Abbie Hoffman's book, his biography, soon to be a major motion picture, that the very end of it says, if you want to get involved, contact Dana Beal at 9 Bleecker Street. So I sent a letter, and I started getting packages of the magazine Overthrow, which I distributed at Evergreen State College. But
cool.
The whole yippie idea of guerrilla theater is so much better than violence, for sure. It's a
right. Well, it was using humor to make your point. In a time when the 60s were over, we're in the time of Reagan. This was absolutely not the time. The 80s was not the time, at least the early 80s, to directly confront the forces of Reaganism. It was a losing proposition. It was much better to be funny. I mean, I remember one of the things we could be pretty radical. Once we did this thing, Henry Kissinger was giving a speech, and so we did this thing. It wasn't really violent, even though it was kill Kissinger. What it really was he had said we were savages or something like that in something he wrote, like those savages. So we all dressed up like savage, like we were like, and then we had this artist friend of ours made us all these cool costumes, and we had a big pot like we were going to boil them alive and everything. And we were pounding on drums, kill Kissinger, kill. And the cops thought it was so funny. They loved it. They gave us all the space to do it. And all the people came out from the speech and said, "Why don't you like Henry Kissinger?" And so we would do things like that. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I remember probably one of the more successful things, and one of the first things was they threw a bunch of dollar bills from the gallery at Wall Street into the trading floor at Wall Street, and all these guys who were trading theoretically hundreds, thousands of dollars worth of stock, they all grabbed on their knees and were going around after those dollar bills, and it closed down the stock exchange.
It's a natural thing, right? Almost anybody would, I think, if you did that. It's like you're natural, like money, and yes, and that was actually subversive. That was considered. That got like a bit. The FBI hated that. I think the strength of the yippies is that if you humiliate them, like run a pig for president or throw money on the floor of the stock exchange,
the Pentagon.
Yeah. Try to levitate the Pentagon and have an international photograph of putting a daisy in the barrel of a gun around the Pentagon. Those kind of things. Run a pig for president, Pegasus. Those things were funny. And also Bob Fass, who just passed away, he was part of that whole thing too. And Fass, they went into Grand Central Station, where they have this like clock with a beautiful opal. It's like in the main information lounge is the famous clock, and it's a giant clock with a big, like this big around a clock face made of opal. It's like worth $40,000 or something like that, just the face of the clock. And the yippies climbed up on top, and they started moving the clock backwards, right? Trying to end the tyranny of time, right? Which is represented by Grand Central Station, this major where all the men in gray flannel suits are coming in and out all the time. So and it was like an acid trip. We applied like acid trip.
Changed dramatically now. I don't know if you were there. I know you were at this year's New York City Cannabis Parade.
Yeah.
And for our audience, that was the first of these marijuana marches that have gone global now. But back in 2013, I was there, and Dana was in jail. I pulled him up on my phone, and he was put on the loudspeaker there in Union Square.
Great. Oh, right. I think I remember that. I was at that. Yeah.
I was kind of one of the keynote speakers in 2013 , so it's quite to see Chuck Schumer there in this year. You recorded that. What was it like at the New York City Cannabis Parade this year?
Well, it was the parade has been going on for 50 years. And way before I got on, I was too young to go down to the city when they were first doing it. And I know some of the people who were at the first ones. And in those days, it was like, it could be like the police could attack and arrest everybody and beat the hell out of people. It was a very militant thing in these early days. And then it became more of like a party thing where we had huge parties. They didn't like the huge parties, so they cracked down again with the nonsensical arrests of children for no reason. And then we sort of mellowed out for a while, and we came back again as more politicized, more coalition type of thing, rather than one of Dana. Dana used to love to put it on himself that he would pay. He had money in those days, and he would pay for it, and it would make it a Dana show. But when after he went to jail, he no longer had money, so he had to make it more of a coalition. And we brought in like Sensi Seeds and High Times and Cannabis Culture and all these different other organizations that came and got involved in it. So it took on more of an ecumenical feel to it, and the movement began to really take off. Basically, the DPA, the Soros people, they used to always sort of fight us, because they were for heroin and thought that we were pot snobs, who were going to sell out the heroin people because we could, for our favorite drug, which I thought was ridiculous. But there was sort of that feeling, and we had these like confrontations with them. But then really it became, the marijuana thing became a racial justice fight, and that won over the Soros people to support it. And when the Soros people supported it, they put their money behind it and their influence. It started to move like lightning. What used to be like incremental change and fighting people and people laughing at us and not taking us seriously, all of a sudden became a powerful thing. And with the DP, and the purpose was, they didn't like what happened in California, because in California they legalized it without any plans, and it became too big business. And one of the reasons I think that you can't it's so hard to get a license in California is because I think the government, I dislike them for doing that, but on this, I see their point, because they don't want it to become a gold rush. Of everybody just throwing money in and destroying it, and then big companies taking it over, and it wouldn't work. All of a sudden you'd have like Lucky Strike brand. They're afraid of that happening in California because it wasn't planned. So in New York, they spent the last 5 years debating what it was going to look like before they legalized it. And then the last year, the governor kept putting it off. And then after what happened in Minnesota with George Floyd, it really, racial justice came to the forefront, and all these guys wanted to look good after George Floyd. Like, we wouldn't do that. Our cops wouldn't do that. That's just those. And so, boom, it passed just like that.
Gained over selling cigarettes there.
Yes. Eric Garner, right?
Yeah.
Lucy's, right. And so, the same thing happened. It was really the first I Can't Breathe experience that we heard of. Of course, I'm sure it's happened many times, but people were videotaping it by then. And so there was a real movement and with the Soros people giving us some juice. And with the people, the lots of politicians now jumping in, not just one or two iconoclastic politicians, but all these politicians jumping in on it. And then they really wanted to, and I think they really meant it. I have to say, I'm pretty as cynical as the next guy, but they really wanted to make this something that would, the money would go to social justice issues and would go to people who were most impacted by the war on drugs would have a chance to make some money on it as sort of a reparations.
Happens. It hasn't rolled out yet. We'll see how it actually gets introduced, but it certainly bodes well, I think.
Yeah.
So you recorded New York's Attorney General, Leticia James. I know you want to introduce that little clip?
Yeah, Tish James. She is the first African-American Attorney General. She comes after the last Attorney General, I think, was drummed out. We had a lot of problems in New York top government with not so much corruption, but like prostitution crimes and sexual harassment crimes. And even though very progressive people, but they just couldn't keep it in their pants or something. I don't know what their problem was, but they were coming. I don't people know you're not supposed to come on to people at work?
Yeah.
And if you're going to run for governor, you would avoid getting on being client 9 on a brothel list of customers. But and then people like Roger Stone, they'll sniff that out a mile away. And so
Elliot
Spitzer and others as well were involved. I don't know all their names, and they come and go, it seems, so fast. So there was a revolving door of all these men, liberal men, who screwed up had all this promise and were going to do all these good things, and they just screwed up one after another. And I think the voters said, if we can't trust white guys who went to Yale and Harvard, let's go with the black woman. Let's do it, Leticia James. Let's go with her. Let's do something crazy.
Barn burner speech.
Yes, she was great. She's great, and she really is an advocate for the people in many ways, to the extent you can be. And it's more civil. Like Attorney General of New York State is a civil job. It's not criminal usually, but they do work in concert. Like she's working with the DA in Manhattan, Cyrus Vance Jr., to go after Trump. But she's on the civil side, and Lonesome Lawyers is very much like Elliot Ness, and speaking of Chicago and Al Capone, they're going after him criminally and by going after his books, and that's the New York and Chicago with Elliot Ness and the going after Al Capone and the mob in the 30s really perfected that. So I don't feel sorry for Trump, but he's definitely in trouble now, and I think they only had one tax return that Al Capone missed was worth 10 years in prison if they don't like you. So as Al Capone learned, so that's what they're doing to Trump. So they're treating him like an organized crime guy. And so, but she's like she's the one who gets the books and goes after the financials.
So here is your recording at this year's May 1st New York City Cannabis Parade of New York State's Attorney General Leticia James.
Where's Brooklyn at? I love you. Yeah, we got Brooklyn. Okay. It's great to be here with everyone. I want to thank all of you for all that you have done during this pandemic. I really appreciate all of those who have made sacrifices. I know we're marching today, but let me also tell you what today is too, and we've got to be reminded of this. Today is May Day. What is May Day? Yeah. So we've got to stand up for workers and unions and immigrants in this country, okay? And we will not be divided by that. And we will not allow anyone to use the pandemic as an excuse to trample on the rights of immigrants and undocumented workers and immigrants. It's important that we legalize and create a pathway to citizenship for all of those individuals who are now in the shadows. I don't know about you, but I see them, we see them. They were essential during this pandemic, and they're essential today. Listen, we all know that the war on drugs has for far too long been a war on poor people and people of color, right? And I have long advocated for the legalization of adult recreational use of cannabis. because I believe it is a social and racial and a criminal justice issue. If you believe that it is a social and racial and a criminal justice issue, make some noise! In many states all across this country, recreational use has been legalized and arrests have plummeted by a large percentage. And they are our sons, our daughters, our brothers, our neighbors, and they're mostly men of color. And these young men are punished for this behavior that others seem to turn a blind eye to, for people of other races and other socioeconomic statuses. And that's not right. And I believe that simple legalization, my friends, is not enough to right those wrongs. It's not enough to right those wrongs. We cannot assume that changing the law to legalize cannabis will be enough to deliver the justice and opportunity that we hope it will bring. It's a good start, but we need more. Make no mistake, legalizing recreational cannabis means more money for our states. But legalized cannabis in those states that have legalized it have seen significant increases in their revenues. But we, because this is a state that believes in equality and justice and equity, we've got to provide opportunities for everyone. 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 And particularly people who have been locked out of the sunshine of opportunity for far too long. It's important that we focus on communities that have been devastated by this war on drugs. And New York has indeed come a long way. We used to be the marijuana arrest capital of the world. I don't think you heard me. New York was once the marijuana arrest capital of the world. Woo! And so, if you believe in justice like I do, then those individuals who are most harmed by the war on drugs, that must be part of the new economy. They must be part of the new economy. And we must provide access to everyone, especially communities of color that have felt the impact of law enforcement in this country and in this city and in this state. So I hope that you would join me. I hope that when we begin the discussion about this legislation, when we pass regulations, that everyone, that all people are at the table of power, and that we again have a conversation with all of those banks, and because individuals who obviously want to take advantage of this opportunity can't just walk into a bank and ask for a loan, right? Because cannabis on the federal level is still treated as a Schedule I drug under the Federal Controlled Substance Act. So banks will not issue loans to those looking for startup funding. It's unfortunate, but it's a federal issue, and we've got to focus on the federal government to ensure that they change the laws so that everyone can take advantage of this issue. And so we have to work together and ladders of opportunity so that everyone who wants to participate in the industry, we got to educate individuals. We've got to be change agents in our communities. And of course, we all got to work together to again lift up all boats and leave no boat behind. So let us all stand together, create opportunities, and focus on justice, and make this legislation an opportunity for equalizing all individuals. I thank you for this. I look forward to working with all of you. It's on to upward economic mobility and opportunity for all communities. Thank you so much.
And as you can see, she is an unusual, Leticia James, who we just heard, is an unusual attorney general. Especially for a big state like New York or Illinois or California. It's not the usual button-down, white-shirted Harvard, Yale, Stanford graduate. Here is University of Chicago or whatever. Here is somebody who's really of the people and has really turned the office into something that goes after all the people who rip off consumers. Basically, that's what it is. And she is seeing and looking at marijuana as a consumer rights issue, that consumers have a right to control the market, and that consumers should have power in what how the marijuana laws, the new marijuana legalization, and the future that they're working on right now, and they're going to hammer out the future licensing structure and how the shops are going to be handled and how the taxation is going to happen, and I'm glad it's in her hands. It's in good hands with her, but she's determined to make sure that the same community that was most impacted by the war on drugs, and you have to realize stop and frisk was all about marijuana, and under Giuliani,
New York City policy, they had
yes,
stopping someone where marijuana was decriminalized, so they could not arrest you for marijuana. But if you had a rolling paper or a pipe, then that was paraphernalia, and they did arrest you for the paraphernalia. So that's
also no. The thing is that marijuana was decriminalized, but you weren't allowed to have it on your person. You could not. And what happens is, especially in the hood, for lack of a better word, the habit was to have what we would call a dime bag or something, or maybe an eighth, in your wallet, and that was a very common way for people to go. That was the culture here. Was everybody went around with $20 worth of pot in a small envelope or a glassine baggie or in tin foil in their wallet, and then
I was amazed in the 70s when I came to New York that cannabis was smoked pretty openly just about everywhere. I remember going in and seeing the Who movie, The Kids Are All Right, and everybody was smoking in that theater.
Oh, I think, and I think, of course, everybody's proud of their own location where they grew up and all of that. So, take it with whatever. But it's my understanding that New York City consumes more marijuana per capita than any place in the world.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that.
There's a lot of stress to de-stress on there, I think.
Right.
It definitely helps that.
Right.
So as mentioned earlier, I was amazed, having been a keynote speaker at the New York City Cannabis Parade back in 2013, to see the leader of the United States Senate, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, there in this May 1st. And you recorded that right at the front of the stage there.
Yeah, so I got right up there. Yeah, oh yeah, he was. He lives in Brooklyn, and you cross your fingers because John Lennon loved New York. If you read about John Lennon, he loved New York because of the anonymity. You could be the most famous person in the world, and I've seen the most famous people in the world just going down the street to go shopping. I say hi to Susan Sarandon all the time. Hey, Susan, how you doing? And I didn't get to meet John because I was in Madison at the time, but many friends of mine knew John, and he would just come to the park and play guitar with David Peel and stuff like that. New York, the coolest thing about New York is that famous people can have anonymity here, and the cool of New York, and New York's famous for its jazz style cool, is and dressing in black and all of that, is that nobody acts perturbed when a celebrity is around. It's like totally uncool to do that. Nobody in New York, you could have John Lennon sit down next to you. You could have Senator Schumer across from you on the subway, and you wouldn't even you might not even smile or even recognize who he is. And that is part of the New York thing. And as you know, that Mark David Chapman wasn't from New York. He flew out to New York from wherever he was to hunt this guy, and so. Generally, famous people go around without much or any security at all, or the security is very discreet. Bodyguards are discreet. They don't go around like with bodyguards on both sides of them, going everywhere with them real obviously. The bodyguards,
Secret Service agents around him, in other words.
They were in the distance. They were watching, but they were, New York is New York. Anybody who's from New York knows it's cool. I mean, the bad things that happen when some horrible person comes to New York to hunt you down. That's when that's the bad things that happen. Rarely do you ever hear it from New York. Not that we had Son of Sam and all that. Crazy people go off and think their dog is talking to them or something, but you can't control that. But generally, this is a place where historically for hundreds of years, the famous, the celebrity, the not so famous, the poor,
Yeah.
intermingle.
But pretend they had anonymity.
Yes.
So, you want to say anything else to introduce Schumer's
Just
speech?
that Schumer just walked on up. I think I saw in the distance he did have a couple of security guys. They weren't really there. He was all shaking everybody's hand. He's more like a medium level, lower level rock star. Like somebody from a band that wasn't really that big, but bigger than the average band. And and he came up and gave the speech. And we're going to hear, which is amazing that the majority leader of the United States Senate came out to praise legal marijuana.
Yeah, and on April 20th, he tweeted out, "Happy 420, legalization is coming." So here is Paul's video of Schumer on May 1st.
All right, so everybody can see we have a very famous person over here, I think. I think people can see that we have the majority leader here. Senator from New York, Senator Chuck Schumer!
Thank you everybody. Yes. Thank you. So, let me just say everybody a couple of things. First, I want to say to all of you, I am thrilled to be with you today at this great gathering, which I know has been a long time in coming. And let's have a thank you to Steve Bloom. There you are. Okay. Now I want to do two things here. First, celebrate the just, equitable legalization of marijuana we have accomplished together in New York. And second, tell you about the fight that I am leading to legalize marijuana nationally in all 50 states. Now, we're all here because we know that we must move past the failed model of the war on drugs. For decades, this has been horrible. Young men and young women, disproportionately young men and women of color, have been arrested and jailed for even carrying small amounts of marijuana, a charge that came with exorbitant punitive penalties, a serious criminal record, and so many of them could never recover from that. We can never let that happen again. These were young men and young women with dreams of their own, with promise, with potential, who had their lives ruined, simply because they happened to have a joint in their pocket. This over-criminalization of marijuana hurt individuals, but it hurt entire communities. Change has been urgently needed for so long. And that is why when you all asked me to stand with you, the organizers like Senator Ramos and Senator Biaggi and many others, and Tish James, she's here. Am I leaving any legislators out? And Harvey Epstein, and Carolyn Maloney. I'm good. Okay. And all of them, I joined with you and told the state, get off your butt and pass MRTA now. And guess what? They did. I pushed for the MRTA because I knew that legalizing marijuana itself is not enough. We need investment in communities harmed by the war on drugs. We need social equity in licensing entrepreneurs. And we need the expungement of records once and for all. We need it to start repairing the harms the war on drugs has done to New Yorkers. And with a huge coalition, we did just that. We raised our voices. We made it possible for the MRTA to become law. So I want to say it was an honor to work with some of my friends who I've known for years in the legislature. Someone who helped me get elected to the Senate when she was just a council member in Buffalo, and now the majority leader, Crystal Peebles-Stokes. And Liz Kruger from, I guess, this district. Yes. And Diane Savino from the great borough of Staten Island. And organizers like Cassandra Frederic. Is she here? We love her. Are you here, Cassandra? She is a dynamo. She is incredible. And of course, here in New York, Melissa Moore, who led the charge. She here. They're great. And of course, Vocal New York, who relentlessly, hi Vocal, who relentlessly worked. When things got tough, what did they do? Did they give up? No. Did they throw up their hands and say, we're not going to get this done? No. They doubled down, put their heads down, made sacrifices in their personal lives, missed time with friends and families, spent hours and hours in frustrating meetings, and got it done. Those at the state level who led the charge here, many of whom are out here, you inspire me. And so let me just say, I am so happy we got this over the finish line. So happy. Amen. The legalization in New York is the most ambitious in the country. In the critical areas of racial and economic justice, it sets new standards. It makes real, tangible impacts on the lives of millions. So let's take a moment and celebrate what we have already accomplished. All across the state, from Buffalo to Brooklyn, communities devastated by the war on drugs are beginning to be renewed, repaired, and made whole again. Young people are able to celebrate today without a fear that a little bit of marijuana in their pocket could ruin their lives. More freedom, less fear. Right now, somewhere in this city, hopeful entrepreneurs are gathering together, thinking up a future marijuana business that'll provide jobs for New Yorkers and tax dollars to harmed communities. And for thousands of New Yorkers with marijuana arrests on their records, the steps we have taken will provide a new lease on life. So I want to hear a big, long New York round of applause for every single organizer who has pushed this through the years. Now, we're going to transfer that energy to Washington. And I want to tell you, today we're working to bring the focus of racial and economic justice you brought to the MRTA to the federal level. I was the first congressional leader of any party to come out in support of ending the federal prohibition on marijuana. And I am proud of that. And right now, with my colleagues, Senator Booker and Senator Wyden, we're going to put forward an advanced comprehensive cannabis reform legislation that will not only turn the page on this sad chapter in American history, but undo the devastating consequences of these discriminatory and often bigoted policies. We got support across the country. Did you hear about South Dakota? Hardly a liberal bastion. They voted to legalize in November. So this is happening across the country. We're going to get bipartisan support for our legislation. And we got to do it the right way, We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in communities of color, provide opportunity for folks who have been hit hard by the prohibition. All of the old arguments and fear-mongering, that crime would go up, that there would be a parade of horrible things hasn't happened. Justice Brandeis called the states the laboratory of democracy. And on marijuana, they have served just that role. We have taken the legalization to the laboratories of democracy. We did the experiments and the results are in. What we have accomplished in New York is just the beginning. I will fight with you until we get fair, just, and full legalization in Washington. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, folks.
And we just listened to Chuck Schumer, and he gave a great speech. He was well received. Again, New York is a pretty strong Democratic place. Donald Trump had to move out of there to move to Florida. So Chuck Schumer is a hometown hero. And because, New York is such a diverse place, the idea of sort of America for white people first type of thing goes over here like a lead balloon. So Chuck Schumer is a beloved guy, even though his politics aren't really that great. But he's definitely chosen one issue that, he can be somewhat a man of the people.
So if somebody wanted to reach out to you or see your program at WBAI, do you have any websites or anything?
Yeah. The quickest way to get to me is paulderienzo.com. Paul, DeRienzo.com. And even if you spell it wrong, it sort of comes up anyway. So if you go to Paul DeRienzo, Paul, DeRienz as in zebra, O.com, you'll see my BAI, links to all my BAI programs, and then I have a video reel. And as far as my YouTube channel, I don't really have a direct link. It's called Let Them Talk. So if you go to youtube.com/letemtalk, LETEMTALK, just search my name and it comes right up under video, right? It's like I had a million of them. So Paul DeRienzo, just search me on Google and it'll come right up, and you can go see my YouTube page. I have a couple of YouTube pages. One is my show, and the other one is just stuff that's interesting that I shot around town. And I have at paulderienzo.com, you have a link to my archive of radio news programs and a demo reel of my best video stuff.
I know you were just doing a video the other night at Washington Square in the Village. They were shutting the park down apparently for a couple nights in a row and throwing people out of it. And it's kind of getting hot there in New York City right now, right?
Right now it's 93 degrees.
Right.
And humid, and it's only June.
Yeah, people were just chilling out in the park, and for some reason the mayor decided to send a bunch of police in to clear the park.
Yeah, this is an ongoing dispute over, it's a very crowded city, and the people, everybody's been indoors for like 18, as you guys know, right? We were all indoors for 18 months, not allowed out of our own house. So all of a sudden they're saying we can go out, but then they don't want you to go out. There are too many of you. You're having too much fun.
Right.
And it's sort of ridiculous. We had, you have to step back from it. New York is traditionally it's very low crime, even though everybody thinks of New York as a high crime place because of the movies and because of what it was like a long time ago, like back in the 1930s and maybe for a little bit in the 70s. And then there was that sort of gangsta thing that was going on in like the early 90s. But that stuff never really lasts. And what happened was the economy got a lot better. And I have to say, I'll give praise for immigration because so many people coming to New York really invigorated what used to be a really crappy economy, and people were being hired. I mean, we had near full employment, and the crime rate. There you go. Anybody tells you you're too good, or what do you mean? All they need are jobs. Yeah, all you have to do is give jobs, and the crime rate goes down, like way down, like instantly. And they provided good jobs, and we had a strong economy for a long time, and the crime rate went all the way down. And then with this COVID thing, it's not that the crime rate's going up, but who's out on the streets? All the people who have a brain are in home and trying to not get sick. And out on the streets, you have all the people who have problems.
Yeah, you've got young people who can't afford to hang out in the nightclubs, right? And so
the nightclubs are not inside any. You're not allowed to go inside. The nightclubs are all in wooden structures they've allowed to be built along the streets.
Yeah, we have the same thing here in Portland.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Well, we're about out of time, Paul. I want to thank you for your continuing work there, and thanks for sharing your videos with us. We've had Paul DeRienzo. Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing, Paul?
Just thanks for all the support, and we love Portland, and thanks you guys for standing up and speaking truth to power in the last couple of years. It's been an inspiration here in New York, and I think the reason we were fighting to get back into our parks over the weekend and making those videos is because of the example that we saw in Portland and what a wonderful city you guys have. And Oregon pioneered what we're doing now years later, the legalization of marijuana in New York. And it's because of California, Oregon, and Washington State that we're doing it.
All right. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Remember to keep working to restore hemp. Good night.
We all take care.